Hello everyone, myself Dr. Veena RS, Associate Professor, Department of IEC, the Anand Sagar Academy of Technology and Management, Bangalore. In this lecture video, we will be learning Lab Program 4 of Object-Oriented Programming with Java, with the subject code BCS306A for third semester under VTU 2022 scheme. Before we start writing the program, let us see what program is and how we can analyze that program to go forward with. So this is what a lab program goes like this. A class called MyPoint, which models a 2D point with X and Y coordinates and is designed as follows. So the bullet points, what is mentioned in the problem statement, are all the members of the class MyPoint. Whenever we say there is a point, so we all know that in a 2D plane or 2D model, every point will have two coordinates X and Y. And this entire problem statement, what it demands is we have to find out the distance between two different points, and we have to also find out the distance between the point and the origin, that is 0, 0. So to deal with this, there are multiple instance variables given. We have different constructors defined in the problem statement, various methods to set the X and Y coordinate as well as to read the X and Y coordinates of the given point, toString method to return the string and display it in the proper format. And you have distance method to be defined in this class to find out the difference between two different points. So to summarize this entire problem statement, we can say that we have to write a Java program to find out the distance between two different points using the members of the class MyPoint. So to find out the distance between 2 points, we first should understand what is the formula it goes across with. And after reading or after knowing the particular formula, we will be able to analyze the entire problem and write the program. So when we say it is a 2D plane, that is X and Y axis, we have two different points here shown in the given diagram, that is A and B. So you can see A is a point with the coordinates x1, y1, and B is a point with the coordinates x2 and y2. So if you want to find out the distance between two points, what the formula it goes it as like this. D equal to square root of x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square. So this distance formula, we have to keep it in mind, and we have to say that we have to find out the distance between 2 points using this particular program. So this entire problem statement, we can also visualize in the form of a diagram, something like this. I can say MyPoint is nothing but a class here. This is what a MyPoint class, which is demanded in the problem statement to have all the members of MyPoint with this. So what MyPoint class contains the members as. So you can see here, I have just listed it as int x and y. So we know that every point to be constructed will have two coordinates, x and y coordinates. And this x and y coordinates will be called as the instance variable of the given class. The problem statement also says that the point can be created with the origin, that is 0, 0, or the point can be constructed or created with any of the x and y coordinates what we pass. So there are two constructors to be defined in this class, MyPoint, that is a default constructor. You can say this MyPoint with no arguments is nothing but a default constructor. And this default constructor is going to construct a point with the origin or with x and y coordinates as 0, 0. And you also have one more constructor with two parameters, and both the parameters are of type integer. So that means you are overloading a constructor with two parameters by setting two different values x and y to be passed as parameter of the constructor. You also have the other members of the given class. One of the method you can say is setXY. So setXY method is to be defined in this class to set the point. When we say it is a method to set a point, that means what? You are setting the x and y coordinates to a particular point using this particular method. Suppose I want to read the x and y coordinates of a given point. You can also define a method called as getXY. So getXY is a method which is used or which is defined to return and display the point. And getXY, as per the problem statement, says that it has to return the two element array. That means it has to return x and y coordinates together. And one more method is demanded in the problem statement called as toString, which will define the format of the coordinates to be displayed or format of the point to be displayed on the screen. So once again, if I go through, this is what a problem statement you can say. The first bullet point you can see it here is you need two instance variables X and Y. So those instance variables I have listed here it as instance variables int X and int Y. The second point, if you go through, you need a default constructor. Default means no argument constructor, which should be able to construct a point at the default location of 0, 0. So that also I have listed in this particular visualization diagram. That is my point without any parameters. The third member you can say is overloaded constructor. That means you should have one more constructor which is overloaded with two different values X and Y coordinates to construct a point. So that also I have listed it here as a my point with two parameters, that is X integer and integer, that is X and Y. The next, you can say, you should also be designing this my point with a method x set xy to set both x and y. So that also I have listed it here. Then the next member it is demanding is get xy, which will return the x and y value in a two-element integer array. That means it is going to return the array from this particular method. So that is also I have listed here. Get xy is a method which is going to return one-dimensional array. ToString is a method that returns a string description of the instance in the format x, y. So one more method I have listed here, ToString, which is going to return a string value and that string value to be displayed as a point, that is with brackets, x coordinate, comma, y coordinate, and then bracket close. And as per the problem statement, you can see the next three bullet points, that is a method called as distance, overloaded method distance, and another overloaded method distance. You have to write it down. So what is this is one distance method you are overloading with three different definitions. That means method overloading you are using here, one with no parameters, one with two parameters, and one with one single parameter of type object itself or class itself. So you can see here. So these three are distance methods I have listed here as the member of the MyPoint class, in which the first method you can see here is distance is a method without any parameters which is going to return double value. So what is mean by double value here is the distance between 2 points will be calculated and that particular calculated value will be returned back to the parent or returned back to the position or control from where it has been called with. One more overloaded distance method is there where you will be passing the entire object itself. And that object itself is of which type? My point. That means again it will have two different coordinates x and y. And one more distance method we have to overload here, not by passing the point, but instead just passing the x and y coordinates. So when we say my point is a class name, that is an object you are passing to this method, that is distance, definitely it should have x and y. That means it should have these two values, x and y from the distance method, and it should be able to find out the distance for the same. So just to visualize this and analyze what exactly the problem statement talks about is, I have just shown it in this particular diagram. So once you analyze this diagram, you can easily say that there are two instance variables, there are two constructors, there are three different methods to set the value, to get the value, and to print the value in the specific format. And you have three overloaded methods for finding out the distance. So these three methods, if we are using to find out the distance, these methods will definitely will have the formula that is d equal to what? Square root of x2 minus x1 square plus y2 minus y1 square. So this is basically the entire class with members. I have visualized it in one single diagram. So just what we can do is this diagram, once we have understood, we'll just convert this diagram into a program, and that becomes your lab program 4. So I will directly take you to the IntelliJ IDE where we'll start writing a program looking into this particular diagram, and we'll execute that program and see how successfully it gets executed. So what is the first step here is we have to create a class called as MyPoint. Okay, so I'll just go to IntelliJ. This is what an IntelliJ IDE I'm using. I have already created one project, and in that one file I have created called as main.java, which is actually a main one, or I can just delete this particular main.java file. I'll just delete it. And as the problem statement says, this is what a problem statement you can say. So you have to create a class called as MyPoint, and you have to create an object of this MyPoint and test all the methods which are described over here using the program that is test MyPoint. So what is the first thing we should do is we should create a class called as test MyPoint, which will become a main class. So I'll just go to source folder here. I'll right click on new, and I'll just go to Java class. And with what name I want to create a class is test my point. So I want to test my point, whatever my point class has been created. So you can see here, the class has got created, and in this class, we'll be having public static void main. Okay. So before this, to test the methods of class my point, we have to now see this diagram. We have to create a class called as MyPoint. So how do you create a class called as MyPoint? You will just say class with what name? MyPoint. And I'll just start the definition. Now this particular definition will contain all the members of MyPoint. We'll again go back to this diagram. We'll just go from instance variables till all the methods to be defined. What are the two different instance variables we have? X and Y, which will act as X and Y coordinate of a given point. So these two variables need to be declared in MyPoint class. So I'll just write int I, comma, j. Or I'll just say int x, comma, y to be very specific. So I have created two instance variables x and y. And if you want this x and y value should not be accessed outside the class, I can always make it as private. I can just say these are nothing but what? Private members, which can be accessed only within the class, but not from outside the class. So we have declared X, we have declared Y. That means two instance variables we have already declared in the class MyPoint. The next point is we should have two different constructors to be written in the class MyPoint. We know that. What do you mean by constructor? The name of a method, if it is same as the class name, you call that method or that special method as constructor. And that constructor need not be called explicitly whenever you instantiate a class. That means whenever you create an object of class, the constructor will automatically gets called. That means constructor is a special method which actually constructs the object. So we have two constructors to be defined over here. So the name of the class and name of the method should be same. So we say one default constructor I want to use, default constructor, and one more constructor I want is parameterized constructor. So again, I'll just say parameterized constructor, my point, bracket, and how many parameters we need? Two different parameters. And what are those parameters? X and Y coordinates of a point. So I'll just say int X, comma, int Y. So these are the two different constructors I have just written with the skeleton or with the structure. You can say two constructors I have defined here. Now, what should be the definition of this point? So it says if my point or the point object is created using my point as a default constructor, the X and Y coordinates of that point should be assigned as 0. So what I should do is the value of X and Y should be initialized as 0 whenever the object is created with the help of default constructor. So we already have x coordinate with the variable name x and y coordinate with the variable name y. So if you want to make it more clear with that this x and y belongs to this particular class members only, I can explicitly use this keyword. I can just say this dot x is equal to 0 and I can say this dot y is equal to 0. So what I have done here is in default constructor, the constructor x and y coordinates, the value will become 0. Now, one more constructor we have where we are passing the value that is x and y. So whatever the values we are passing while constructing a point should become the x and y coordinates of the given object or given point. So what I will do is the parameters are x and y, and these parameters should be copied into the instance variables x and y. So what will I do here? This dot x is equal to x, and I'll say this dot y is equal to y. So this is a keyword which always refers to access or to refer with the instance variable, which is for the current class. So this is what the second constructor we have defined with two parameters x and y. So whenever the object is created, we'll be able to set the values of x and y through this constructor as well. We'll go back to the diagram. So we say here instance variables we have declared, we have also defined the constructors. Now the various methods we have to go on defining in this particular class. What is the next method we have is set xy method. And what set xy method is doing? It is used to set a point. That means it should be able to set the values of x and y in the given method. So here we will have a definition for set xy. And whenever I say set xy method has to be done, definitely we have to send some values. So I will set the values like x and y. I'm passing the values of set x and y coordinates in the method set xy. So once again, I'll say this dot x is equal to x. I'll say this dot y is equal to y. So suppose you don't create an object with parameterized constructor and you want to set the values of x and y coordinates, you can always invoke a method set xy by passing the coordinates x and y to that particular object, and it will become the point with those particular coordinates. So this is what the set xy method also we have written. Next method we have is to return and display the point. To return means I want to return the x and y coordinates of a given point and I should be able to print it. So the next method we have is it is returning integer type of value, but it is not one single value it is returning two different values x and y coordinates. And as it is returning more than one value, you can store it in an array, and those array values you can use it in the program. So what is the method name is get xy. So what getXY will do is this method is going to return the x and y coordinates of the given point. So how do you say that? How the x and y coordinates it can take it? So I can just say, suppose I will create a array, integer type array. Suppose coordinates is one of the variable I will write it. And this variables are nothing but what? X, comma, y. Okay, so that means what? If get xy method is been invoked for a particular object, it will read the x and y of that object and it will return it into variable coordinates. Now, as this method is returning integer array, you have to explicitly return the value. What you have to return the value is coordinates. So coordinates is already of type array. So return coordinates is going to return the coordinates of the given point. This is what a next method we have defined, that is getX is also done. After that, what is the next method is toString. Basically, toString method, it is asking, or it is to be in the problem statement, toString method is to be written to display a point in the format like brackets, x coordinate, comma, y coordinate, bracket close. So we have to write that method here again, define. So just say string. The name of the method is toString, and this toString method should be able to return type. So I will just write return. It is returning which type of data? String type of data. So I will write double quote. So in this double quote, I have to specify the format how I want the particular value to be printed. So I want first it to be printed as what? Opening parenthesis. I want opening parenthesis to come. Then it should be added with what value? X. After that, what it should have? Comma. After that, what it should have? The value of y. And after that, what you should have is bracket close. So this is what the format you have written. So where we say that it is going to return this entire value in this format. So it will return the value something like this, bracket, then x, then comma, then y value, and then bracket closed. So this is what a toString method we have. So we have defined different constructors, two constructors, three methods I have defined, two instance variables we have declared. And other than that, you have to now also overload three different methods to find out the distance. Distance with a 0 argument, distance with 1 argument, and distance with 2 arguments. So when I say this, you can see here, it is clearly asking that a method called distance with two parameters x and y should return the distance from this point to another point at the given x and y coordinates. So there are x and y coordinates. So now we should be able to apply the formula to find out the distance between 2 points, and we should be able to do that. So what we will do is, I will just say it is returning which type of data? Double. What is the name of a method? Is distance. First, I will just define the distance for with the coordinates as x and y. So x and y method, this is one method. I will say we have one more method called as, I will be passing the object itself. What is the object? What it talks about? The object is nothing but name of the object. It is specified as another. So I will just say here also another. And this is what one more method. And one more third method we want to have distance with no parameters. And this distance is going to find out the distance between point and the origin, that is 0, 0. That is what it talks about. Okay, so we have to write down now the definition of this method, which says that how to find out the distance. So suppose you have two different coordinates, that is x and y. How do you find out the distance between this particular point? That means whatever the value I am passing with the values which already the point has. So I can simply say, it's very simple. I'll just say, first I have two now coordinates, x coordinates and two y coordinates. So what is the distance formula we know? Square root of x2 minus x1 square plus y2 minus y1 whole square. We know. So can we find out the difference and store it in a variable, and then I can find out the square root of that and I can do that? Yes, I can definitely do that. So what I will do, I'll just make it as int. I'll just say, suppose difference of x. What is the difference of x here? I have this dot x value already existing minus x. So this x I'm passing as a parameter, and this dot x is the value of the object. So suppose I have a point P1 with some values and I have a point P2 with some values. P2 can be passed as two different values and that can have a difference. So x2 minus x1, you got it in difference x. Again, I'll say I have one more variable created for difference between the y coordinates. That also I'll make it as what? This dot y minus y. Now I have got a different, that is x2 minus x1 I got, x2, y2 minus y1 I got. Now can I pass these parameters to the square root, and I can do that. So square root may give you a floating point number. So I've just created it as double. And now what we have to do is we have to find out the square root of this difference of x square plus difference of y square. So how do you find out, or how do you invoke a square root method here is, we have a package called as, we have a class called as math. In this math, you have the method called as square root. And in this square root, what you can do is difference x into difference x plus difference y into difference y. This is what a formula I have written, and whatever the value you get here, that value you can directly return it. So instead of saying double, I can also write the value something like this. I'll just say return this. I'll write like this. That means what? You're finding out the square root of difference of x square plus difference of y square, which we have already calculated as x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1. x2 minus x1 is in a variable diff x, and y2 minus y1 is stored in diff y. So diff x square will become the square of that, plus diff y square will become the square, and the square root is a method which will calculate. But now square root is a method from which class? That is math class. So we have invoked, as square root is a static method can be invoked directly with the class name. So we have written math.sqrt. So this is how we have find out the distance between two different coordinates. Now, these two coordinates, that is x and y, can appear in the form of a object or point, or it can appear as separate x and y coordinates. So if we are passing the values as x and y coordinates separately, it will be able to find out the distance with this particular definition statements. The second overloaded distance method we have, where we are not passing the x and y coordinates separately. Instead, we are passing the object itself, and that object is already having x and y coordinates. So x and y coordinates again we have to use, because we know that x and y coordinates only will be used to find out the distance between the points. So can I call the distance method with x and y coordinates which I have already written within this method, so that it can find out the distance between that one point to another point also. So I can do something like this. I'll just say one single statement written. What we should written? Call the method. Which method? About distance method. With how many parameters? 2 parameters. But those 2 parameters are nothing but the MyPoint parameters. So what is the object we have? Another dot x, comma, another dot y, and semicolon. So what do you mean by this is, formula you have already stored it in one single method, that is distance method. So instead of using the formula again and again in various methods, I will store it in one single method, and that method only I will call it with the values of x and y. So when I am passing my point as an object to find out the distance between 2 points, that point will also have x and y. There is already a definition for x and y as a distance. So I can directly pass this, I can directly call the distance method here by passing the values as another dot x and another dot y. And what is another here? Another is nothing but an object of my point. That means it is nothing but one of the point with 2 different coordinates. And one more method we have to find out the distance between between the point and origin. And the origin is what? 0. So whenever I invoke this method, that is distance method, for any particular object point, definitely it will have x and y values. But only thing is, what we have to pass is 0. So can I again call a written method, or can I again call a method called as distance, and here I can directly pass the values as what? 0 and 0. That means whichever object I am using here to invoke the method, that is distance, and what is the next point I am passing here is x and y coordinates as 0 and 0. So if you just go through this, you can see here all the members of the MyPoint class I have defined in the given program, or we have written it in the program. So you can just revise it. If you say you have created a class with the name MyPoint, 2 variables we have declared x and y, 2 constructors we have defined, one with 0 and one with some particular values. Then we have set the values using an explicit method. We can also read the values through the method. We can display the point in the specific format using toString, and 3 overloaded methods, which is going to find out the distance between 2 points. One is to find out the difference between 2 different points, and one is to find out the difference from one point to the origin. So this is how we have constructed the class. Class is already done. Now, after defining this class, after creating this class, we have to demonstrate all these methods to find out the distance between 2 points in a given program, or in a main class called as test point. So after my point class is been defined, we have to now create a main class. So that is what we have done here. Public class test my point. Test my point is the name of a class. And what should be the body of this particular class? It should have a main method first of all. And this main method should instantiate the class MyPoint and create an object and invoke the methods and demonstrate for the same. So now whatever the methods and the constructors or instance variables you have written there in the class, we can demonstrate here with the object. So what we will do is we will create 2 different points of MyPoint. So how to create an object? Name of the class, and suppose I say the first point is denoted with the object as point 1. So to have point 1, what we should do? We have to create an object. How do we create? Use a new operator. What is the name of a class? My point. I'm using a default constructor here. That means what? Point 1 is created as a point with two different coordinates, x and y. And as we have used default constructor here, default constructor, what it does? I'll just show you here. Default constructor basically sets the values to what? 0 and 0. So you can say here, point 1 is displayed as 0, 0. Okay. Now, one more point I have to create to find out the distance between 2 points. I'll just say point 2. I can create this second point either by using a parameterized constructor or by using setX also. I'll just show you here my point and I'll just pass the values. Suppose I say I'm passing the values like 1, 2. The values I have set it as 1, 2. That means what are the values for point 2 is 1, 2. So in 2D plane, x coordinate is 1 and y coordinate is 2. So this is what a second point we have created, second object we have created. Now, after pointing this, can I reset the values of point 1? Can I set the values of point 1? Because I already set the point 1 with the coordinates as 0, 0. So I can always do that. So we have already created one method called as setXY. So I can always say point 1 dot setXY. Okay, set xy will have how many values? Suppose the values I am setting it as 3, 4. That means we are now very clear with that. There are 2 points actually, point 1 and point 2, in which the value of point 1 is 3, 4 and x and y coordinates of point 2 is 1, 2. So we have set 2 different values. Now, before we find out the distance between these 2 points, can we just display those points on the screen? So to display the points on the screen, we have 2 different methods available with us. One is getXY and one is toString. So how do we display it? So I can just say system dot out dot println. Okay, println. And suppose I want to display the point 1 as bracket, comma, x and all those things. So I can always say point 1 dot toString. Okay. So if I just do this, toString method we have already defined here, where it says that it defines or it returns the value in this particular format, that is bracket x and y. And what I will do is, and I also want suppose some message to come like this, point 1 colon. Okay, I want some message like this. Okay, I'll just say plus. So what we are doing here, point 1 message should come or point 1 some point name label of the point 1 should come followed by the value of point 1. And I will also try to print the point using getXY. So I'll just say system dot out dot println. I'll say suppose point 2. Point 2 I want to display in this format using the second one. So how do you do that? This is nothing but what? GetXY. So GetXY method is what? It is going to return 2 different values. One is called as x coordinate and one is y coordinate. So when we say getXY method, it is returning a 2D array. How many values actually it is returning? 2 values it is returning. And when I say 2 values it is returning, that means the values will be stored at position number 0 and position number 1. So I can just say here, I want to print point 2 with getXY method. So I'll just say the name of object is point 2 dot. Which method I want to call? GetXY. But getXY method is returning 2 different values. That is of array. So values will be stored at position number 0 or 1 because as only 2 elements it is sending. So I can just say x coordinate is stored at dot 0th position. Then plus, and I'll say after that, suppose I want to give comma also. So I have written comma plus point 2 dot getXY of 1. So what it does, it takes the value at position number 0, that is index 0 of array and index 1 of array. So this is how it will print it. Now, once it prints these values, that is points 1 and 2, now we should be able to find out the distance between those 2 points, that is point 1 and point 2. So how will you find out the difference between or distance between these 2 points is, I can also directly write it, system dot out dot println. I'll say distance between point 1 and point 2 is, I'll just write this and I will call the method here itself. I can call the method, I can just say point 1 dot distance. I'll make use of distance by for passing the second object, point 2. So here what I have done, or what we have to do here is, I am calling a method distance by passing the object, that is point 2, and that is invoked on point 1. So what this statement will do, or what this particular method invocation will do is, it is going to find out the distance between point 1 and point 2. And this point 2, when you pass, in turn, it will call the distance with 2 parameters, that is x and y. After that, you have to also, as per the problem statement, you should also be able to find out the distance between point and the origin. So what I will do is, once again, I'll say system.out.println distance between point 1 and origin. I'll just say suppose 0, 0, something like this. This message should come is, and again, I will be calling the method point 1 dot. To find out the distance between the point and origin, we have a method without any parameters. Because when you don't pass any parameters, the value of x and y, that is x and y coordinates, will act as origin, that is 0, 0. So this is what we have written. Okay, let us check. I think the program is done. We'll see here. We'll see. See here. We have to find out the distance from one point to another point, and we have to find out the distance between point to the origin. That is what we have to demonstrate. So this is what the program we have already written. Let us check whether this program executes successfully or not. I will run the program. Run test my point. It is building. It is saying toString in MyPoint cannot override toString in java.lang.object. So what we have to do is, whenever you are making use of toString method to override, because already meaning is there, we want to override this toString method, you should make use of the access specifier as public. Otherwise, you will say that there is a weaker access privilege. So that's why public, if you use it, you'll be able to override this toString method here. Once again, I'll run. See, the program has got executed. You can see here. If you just go through the go through the main function, you have point 1 and point 2. Initially, point 1 has got created with a default constructor. That means point was 0, 0. That is 0 is the x coordinator and 0 is y coordinate. Then you have point 2 as an object where you have set the values as 1 and 2. And again, point 1, you have set it with new values, or the values of x and y coordinate as 3 and 4. And as per the main method, what statements you have written is, you are printing point 1 and point 2 using two different methods, toString and getY. So you can see here, point 1 is displayed using toString method. This is what a toString method. And what toString method is doing? toString method, we are trying to display the answer in this particular format. So that is what you can see. Bracket has come, x coordinate, comma, y coordinate, and bracket has been closed. Same way, Second point, that is point 2, you have displayed using which method? GetXY method. We have made use of GetXY method, which is returning an array with index number 0 and 1. So what are the values for point 2? We have set it to 1 and 2. So you can see here 1, 2 has got displayed on the screen for point 2. And after that, we are trying to find out the distance between point 1 and point 2. So we have just invoked this method. We have called this method. You can see here, this is what the answer we have got, which says that the distance between the points, that is 1, 2 and 3, 4 is 2.82. And you are also trying to find out the distance between point 1 and origin. So you have written point 1 and origin is what? Origin is what? 0, 0. So it has calculated and it has given that this is what the distance of point 1 to origin. So this is how we were able to find out the distance between. Suppose I say, instead of point 2, I'll just make it as again point 1. Let us run and check what it shows. You can see here now, point 1 is 3, 4, point 2 is 1, 1, and I'm trying to find out the distance between the same point 1 and point 1 only. So you can see here the distance between these points is nothing but 0. Same way, suppose I want to find out the distance between point 2 and origin, I can do that as well. Instead of making use of point 1 object here, I can just make use of point 2 and I can run this program. So you can see here, point 2 and origin is something like this. So this is how the program can be executed, which is lab program 4. And here I have set the values as the constant values of the coordinates 1, 2, and 3, and 4. You can also make it generalized one. You can read the X and Y coordinate. That means you can read the points from the user using scanner object, and you can execute this program with whatever input values you give it. I hope you understood the program. Thank you so much. In the next video session, we will see lab program 5. Thank you all.